Hi everyone, I'm Megan Rounds and welcome to Mindset Monday. Mindset Monday is a weekly video blog where I identify a mindset-related topic, offer quick tips and easy applications to help you make a shift in your day or maybe your life. This week's topic is the stories we tell. I thought I'd start out this particular topic with a couple of stories of my own. One is when I was about maybe 10 or 11 years old. I was in a drum and bugle corps, well, and for longer than just that year. But when I started out, I was a color guard, so I was one of the people who held the flags. And drum and bugle corps, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is a lot like a marching band, except with mainly horns and percussion. They don't have the other instruments that most marching bands have. And then they have color guard, which are the flags, and then they have people who twirl rifles, at least at the time I was in them. Some things have changed since then, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Anyway, so when I can't remember exactly how old I was, but somewhere around 10 or 11, I joined this drum and bugle corps, and I started out as a color guard, but I saw the people twirling the rifles, and I just knew that is what I wanted to do. But there was a bit of a catch-22 with that, in that in order to become a rifle twirler, you had to know how to twirl a rifle. And the only way to learn how to twirl a rifle, they never loaned us rifles and things like that. So it was like, I don't even know how most people learned how to do it. They didn't loan them out, so how do you do it? But I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I took the equivalent today of mental health day, let's call it, except at 10 or 11, I pretended I was sick and I stayed home. And it was a rainy day and nobody was at home. My parents worked and I was a latchkey kid. So I took the whole day and stood outside just under the little awning from our roof and taught myself how to twirl a baseball bat because I figured that was kind of like twirling a rifle. And I stayed out there all day long until I learned how to twirl. And from there, then I could borrow other people's rifles when we were practicing and give it a try, see what I needed to improve on, and then I just kept practicing. And I practiced and practiced and practiced, and the next year I tried out and I made it. That's one of my stories, and I'll explain why. I mean, I guess I could go now into it, but fast forward through time and time again, I have set challenges for myself that I like to achieve. So one was joining the Navy when I was 27 years old and being on a ship. That was more challenges and than I can really go into right now. But it was really interesting. But also this was just something that was like, okay, I'm doing it. And another one was when I went to to school for my doctorate. That was a pretty big challenge too. And starting my own business has been one as well. Now, the other story is one where in fourth grade, I was a student council vice president, and I was sitting in the meeting, and I can still remember being in this meeting, and it was boring and long, and I was drifting. I had a hard time staying on track with what was being said. I don't remember talking at all. And I went back to my classroom, and the classroom across the street, their representative was absent that day, and so the teacher had asked me to talk to the class about what we covered in that meeting. And so I told them what I could remember. I went back to my classroom, and about a half an hour later, the teacher from the other classroom came over and called me into the hallway and started yelling at me at the top of her lungs because apparently in this meeting we talked about fundraising or some fundraiser, which I failed to mention to her class, and she was really upset and thought I had intentionally not said anything, but I really just don't even remember talking about it in that meeting. Now, that particular story has stayed with me through the years in varying capacities, and how it's shown up a lot of the time is that when I have fallen into potential leadership roles, I bow out. I haven't wanted to become a leader in that capacity, at least not, I mean, now I do, but years and decades I have not wanted, I didn't even know I was stepping out of leadership roles until I started to really explore those things later in life. If you can say that I'm later in life now. But the purpose of these two stories is just to talk a little, those are the kind of stories I'm talking about, the kind that we tell based on memories we have of when we were children or other experiences that really impacted us dramatically. Now, they can be good stories or they could be stories of difficult situations we've encountered, things like that fourth grade thing. I don't like to be yelled at even today, but back then I didn't know how to handle that. I still remember that teacher's name. And I can take myself back into that situation. So those are some of the things I want to talk about with the stories, is that sometimes the stories that we tell can shape us in ways, certainly they reflect something that is meaningful to us, whether a positive experience or not, but it also can shape the way we behave afterwards. And the more we tell those stories, the more embedded they become. And just today I read a really interesting article about how we kind of think that we can take ourselves back to that memory and it remains intact. But really what happens is we can reconstruct that memory every single time. And so when we go back and reconstruct memories, we're changing things whether we know it or not. And so I want to touch upon that too, because as I progress through these slides, there are some things about that we can use to our advantage now. And I'm going to post on my website that particular article because it's just fascinating, and it includes about 6 or 7 links to other little articles, which is where I found that particular piece of information. Anyway, let's get going. So, are you spinning a yarn or entangled in it? If you're not familiar with the phrase spinning a yarn, that's another way of saying storytelling. And stories are a natural part of how we communicate and connect with people. Certainly, I'm not saying by any means to stop telling stories. I think it's really important to tell stories. It is really how we communicate in our world. Some of those stories can keep us connected to things or events that no longer serve us, not service. And so for me, what that fourth grade story of the vice president of the student council and getting yelled at, hanging on to, why do I even remember that particular experience? There are so many things that happened in fourth grade that I don't remember really anything else from fourth grade except, well, being in drum and bugle corps and getting yelled at by this teacher. So I'm sure there were a lot more things that happened, but those are the 2 that I've hung on to. And so that one with the vice president thing and getting yelled at, that really didn't serve me. And once I figured out that it wasn't serving me any longer, then, awareness is helpful. And then I can make some shifts so that that's no longer creating a barrier to leadership or other things that I aspire towards. So repeating and holding on to those stories are habits. We just come up with some stories, not come up, but we remember stories and we talk about those stories to other people. And sometimes people are receptive to listening. And so, or maybe they're entertained by them. There's all kinds of reasons we tell these stories. And I think I'll go into that a little bit later, but they're habits. These are habits of speech, just like the words from last week's Mindset Mondays. This is another type of habit that we've created, in part to make things easier for us so we don't have to keep coming up with brand new stories every time. But the problem with sometimes telling these stories is that they can keep us in status quo thinking. So they can be limiting beliefs. To shift out of the status quo, we have to adjust or let go of those counterproductive stories. There's nothing wrong with telling the stories that serve us well, but those that don't, unless we already have made a shift away from the barriers that sometimes those stories represent, it is counterproductive to keep telling them. So I like to say you are what you speak, and just like our words, the stories we tell have power. They can unconsciously represent limiting beliefs and outdated mindsets. So one question you may have is, how do I tell the difference between a healthy and counterproductive story? The good kind of stories are general topics to inform, entertain, or explain, or those stories that really represent empowerment or something that we've learned or overcome. All of those types of things are great. The not so good ones are personal stories we tell over and over that represent us as being a victim or a martyr, and we never really move beyond that mentality. We may have been a victim or felt like a victim at the time, and if we tell those stories today and still feel like a victim, then we haven't moved on from the emotional impact of those stories and experiences. Those can diminish our personal power. And I should say, a future Mindset Monday will focus on victims and martyrs specifically and the in-between area. So anyway, what do you do when you find yourself in a counterproductive story, or you find that that you have stories that you're telling that are counterproductive? First of all, don't just reject it outright and try and push it away. It's clearly representing some type of meaning, a meaningful experience or meaningful emotional connection. The more important thing is to try to understand it. Why are you telling this story still? What is that connection that you have to that story? And once you have that understanding, it builds awareness. Once you're aware, it allows you to be more intentional with the way you tell this or this story in the future. So here are some quick tips and applications for storytelling. First of all, focus on what went right instead of what went wrong, if you're able to do that from that same story that is currently counterproductive. For my vice president teacher yelling experience, something that went right was, I became aware of it. And also that I learned that if I want to pay attention in meetings, I have to change the way I am in meetings. So I have a tendency to doodle or to write, and it really helps me to focus on what people are saying. That may not be the best thing for everybody. That's just something that has always helped me. And it was probably in part because of that experience. I was embarrassed that I didn't remember or hear this. And so since then, I adapted a strategy to overcome it. So I can focus on that when I tell that story again. Look for the ways you've adapted, improved, or strengthened. And so I kind of talked about that, but also I'm no longer afraid of leadership roles, of filling people in. In fact, when I was in the Navy, I had to repeat everything I heard in a very drill-like fashion from the engine room to the captain of the ship. If anything got me over the fear of repeating things that I'd heard, it was that role. And then find other more positive stories to tell. Maybe you can just drop that story altogether and try stories that are more empowering. Change that story to have the outcome you would like to have. Like I said before, we take these stories and we reconstruct them every time we bring them up again. So why not add something in there where I tell the teacher, I apologize, I didn't hear it. And she says, that's okay. That part didn't happen in my current memory, but who's to say it didn't actually happen and all I heard was her yelling at me? So the past only exists in our minds. Why, it may sound a little disingenuous to alter a story, but at the same point, that story may have actually been a totally different story than what I remember today. And so if you can shift it in your mind, even if you don't want to tell other people that, it can be more empowering to you, and it can help you overcome those limiting beliefs and counterproductive behaviors that may have resulted from your original memory of that event. That's it for this week's Mindset Monday. If you are interested in learning more about storytelling and the impact they have on our mindset, the words we use and all of those things, but also just take a deeper dive into mindset in general and how to make a shift in your life, check out my upcoming program, Mindset and Owner's Guide. It's an interactive self-paced program. It's online and it's starting soon. Learn more at my website, perculture.com. If you have questions, comments, ideas, or suggestions for future Mindset Mondays, please send me an email at mindset@perculture.com. I am just speaking in an odd way today. Mindset@perculture.com. Remember, mindset's a choice. Choose a great one. Thanks for listening.